Hello everyone! Welcome to my channel and welcome to a new video. This gouache painting challenge starts with ice painting. As I describe in the step-by-step picture tutorial article that can be found on my website, you can find the link in the comments and in the description box. To paint ice, frost and snow actually means to paint water in a solid state. This means that choosing the right colors can be tricky, but on the internet you can find a lot of interesting references and examples to help you with that. For the first painting, I was inspired by the beautiful reference of a frozen lake. I will put the link for this reference below. My intuition told me to use my dry gouache palette for this painting, but after all the exercises that I prepared for the website article, the full pan of dry white gouache finished and I had to use normal titanium white for this video. The version that I painted with the dry gouache white has more contrast and more crisp lines because dry gouache is more difficult to blend. But I like this version as well because it has more delicate tones. The normal gouache that you can use fresh from the tube is very creamy and definitely easier to blend. For the first layer, after I painted the sky, I mixed burnt umber, primary blue, and a small amount of violet to create a dark blue. Then I added more white and went on building the painting with a half-inch flat brush. I added lighter brushstrokes for the sky to paint the clouds. Then I mixed some primary blue with white. I really enjoyed painting iced water and I felt confident to add some cold blue variations. For the step-by-step abstract exercises that you can find on my website, I used my fantasy, but for this painting I followed the reference picture and I built different parts of the eyes with the edge of my flat brush, especially when I used pure titanium white. At some point, I had to dry the painting and blend some parts with clean water and a damp brush. To do this, I wet the brush with water and then I release the excess water on a paper towel. In this phase, it's very important to not blend too much because you can lose the beautiful crisp lines that come to life in a painting like this one. Due to overblending, contrast can be lost as well. With gouache, it's very easy to lighten parts of the painting by adding white, but it's very difficult to recover dark colors. This is how beautiful contrast that makes a painting pop can be lost. The most challenging part when you paint ice with gouache is to create the illusion of transparent layers of ice, one on top of many others. This is very difficult because even the driest layer of gouache activates very fast with water. But here I was at my second ice painting and I felt very confident that I was understanding this more and more. First of all, underneath the deepest layer of ice, water is warmer. That's why colors are darker. While temperatures get low towards the surface, there is more ice. This means that you have more white and crisp lines and highlights in a painting. To create thinner lines and highlight some parts with pure white, I used a smaller round brush and a liner brush. The liner brush is intelligent in a lot of ways. What I love about the liner brush is that it can hold a lot of color between its fibers. The liner brush is very useful, especially when I paint thin and long lines. Here you can see what I painted before with dry gouache in my sketchbook. For the second painting, I loved to paint frost. The reference picture that inspired me showed a lot of frost on some dark brown leaves. I don't know what tree can that be, but to me they really looked like autumn leaves that survived winter. In this exercise, the most challenging part was to paint the background because I had to paint around the leaves with different variations of gray. I used gray and bluish gray mixed with green and violet to create an interesting and expressive background. Here you can see how I painted the first layer of the background. I did my best to keep colors dark enough around the leaves and to not lose the darkest gray value while I added other colors. The sword brush, or angle brush as some call it, was very useful for this part because it was easier to paint around the leaves with this type of brush. At a certain point, I had to let the first layer dry and I had to add another layer on top. But I did this only after I was happy with how the first layer came out, especially after I added some green and violet variations. I am very happy with how the blending came out. Probably I had the advantage of painting on a small area in my sketchbook. I was happy, relaxed. I enjoyed the process and took all the time I needed to paint. A background like this cannot be built in 5 minutes. It takes time and patience to polish it and to create soft transitions. Usually these soft transitions, apart from creating great contrast with more harsh lines and textures, also ignite the imagination of the people who watch the painting. This is how the background looks after a lot of work. It is a rather light background, but still dark enough to create a great contrast for the white transparent frost to pop. To paint the leaves, I used a round brush, dark brown, and a small amount of yellow ochre. For this part, I diluted the paint very much with water, almost like watercolor. It is very streaky and less opaque than I paint normally with gouache, but I like it this way because it gives a nice natural texture to the leaves. This texture contrasts beautifully with the softness of the background. The stem is quite thin. It's important to not paint the stem too thick, but to let space for the frost that will surround it. For this painting, I followed the reference picture and I added lighter and darker colors for the leaves in order to not lose contrast. I took all the time I needed for this part as well, and I continued painting the leaves until I was happy with the result. Before the next painting phase, it's important to let the leaves dry very well because here comes the points painting part. I painted small dots to create an interesting texture for the leaves. This is how I avoided to paint any tiny details that I didn't like for a painting like this. I used a light gray color diluted with water to paint the first hint of frost around the leaves and the stem. I followed the reference picture, but I used mainly tiny dots, thin lines, and my imagination to paint the frost. In the step-by-step tutorial that you can find on my website, I painted a different plant, easier than this one and more winter-related. The best example for a beginner. I encourage you to check it out. It's also a great sketchbook painting idea. It's very interesting to paint frost because it gives such a painterly effect. To enhance this effect, I added highlights with pure white and a liner brush. I continued painting like this until I was happy with the result. For the third painting, I used a trickier reference. At a first glance, this reference looks almost too simple, but that's exactly why it inspires me. Its simplicity inspires me because it gives me space to imagine that I can add a lot of snow, that I can add more berries, and that I can even add frost over the berries. Plus, the background is a great example to show you how to paint an easy version of a blurred background. You can find the link for this reference picture below in the description box. I prepared the drawing for this painting with graphite for the least visible branches and with watercolor pencils for the main visible branch and for the berries. I used a universal spray to block the drawing before adding the paint. This is a great way to avoid smudging, but if you don't want to use it, you can choose normal colored pencils for this part because they usually don't smudge. Colored pencils usually just stay where you put them. This is an example that I prepared exclusively for this video. You can find it nowhere else on the internet. I enjoyed painting this because it really allowed me to express my creativity and I dared to risk, especially with the background. When you paint this type of background, it's important to use thin layers of paint and delicate brush strokes. It's very important to dilute the paint with water. I used gray and bluish gray for the first layers, then I added some dry brush texture with a lighter gray. I was very careful to not cover the background too much. The main purpose was to build a see-through effect, which is just lovely. After the background dried very well, I painted the main branch and the berries. I use mostly light gray for the snow effect and also to paint around the branches. It's important to use pure white mainly for the highlights and the final details. To paint the berries and make them look three-dimensional, I switched between a dark, cooler red and a warm vermilion red. I used the liner brush number 2 because the berries are very small. And this painting is very small in general. After this layer dried as well, I added more frost and snow with pure titanium white and the liner brush. To paint the snowflakes, which is what really makes this painting look very interesting, I used the classical splattering technique and I added white splatters all over the painting. I encourage you to use this technique as well if you want to create a snowy atmosphere for your winter paintings. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you for being here with me on this painting journey. You can find step-by-step tutorials for the other exercises that I painted in this sketchbook on my website. Subscribe to the channel, like and share this video if you want more contents like this. You can find a lot of other interesting videos on my channel if you enjoyed watching this one. Until next time, goodbye and happy painting!